When I came back from a quiet visit with an old friend, I thought I would see the porch light glowing and feel the familiar comfort of home behind the door. Instead, my life seemed packed up and discarded like unwanted belongings. My lamp lay tipped on the doormat. My suitcase rested near the shrubs, half open. On top of everything, attached to a framed photo of my son and me, was a folded note. 6 words, simple and cold, no explanation, no punctuation, just a silent erasure. At that moment, I felt a betrayal deeper than anything I had imagined. It wasn't merely about being pushed aside. It was about being replaced, thoughtlessly, and without warning. Have you ever stood at your own threshold and realized you were no longer welcome there? The evening air held a stillness, the kind that precedes a storm. I had been away only a few days, visiting an old friend upstate. Nothing had happened, no arguments, no tension, at least none I allowed myself to feel. The house was calm when I left. Brendan even hugged me goodbye at the car. Kayla promised she'd water the garden, but stepping out of the rideshare onto the driveway, I sensed something was wrong. The porch light was dark. The windows were unlit. Then I saw it. My suitcase was neatly placed beside a plastic storage bin. On top, a pillow I had sewn decades ago, frayed at the edges, and my night lamp, 2 framed photos, one of my late husband, one of the 3 of us during Brendan's college years. Next to them, folded once, pinned under a magnet, was a note in Brendan's handwriting. Sorry, Mom, no space for you anymore. No punctuation, no signature. I stood frozen for a long time. No tears, no knocking, nothing to say. I lifted my suitcase carefully, tucked the photos inside, held the lamp under my arm. I walked away without glancing back. My footsteps made no sound, no curtain opened. The silence felt heavier than shouting ever could. At the street corner, I paused and looked back once. The porch remained dark. I kept walking. That first night, I found a bench near the community garden just a few blocks away from the house. It wasn't comfortable, but I wasn't ready to reach out to anyone. I needed a quiet space, not the cold silence of a locked door, but the gentle, unassuming kind that lives in the morning air and rustling maple leaves. The garden had always been my sanctuary. Years ago, before Kayla arrived, Brendan and I built a compost bin there. I showed him how to trim herbs carefully, without harming the roots. I used to bring him here after school when he was little. Now older and stiffer, I sat in the same spot, trying to make sense of everything. The sun was just rising when I made my way to the nearby bus stop. I had no destination in mind. I just needed to keep moving. By mid-morning, I was walking past a row of townhouses near the park. One looked familiar. Brendan and Kayla had mentioned possibly moving there someday. It was a newer development with broad windows and polished railings. Then I saw them. Through the sheer curtains of the corner unit, Brendan stood near the dining table. Kayla sat across from him, flipping through a folder. Their heads leaned close, expressions focused. Kayla laughed. Brendan gave a tight, polite smile. She held up something that looked like a real estate brochure, a glossy kitchen photo visible. She pointed at it with enthusiasm. Brendan turned away, picked up a mug, lifted it to his lips, but didn't drink. For a moment, I thought he might have seen me, but he didn't react. Maybe he wasn't looking at anything at all. Kayla said something more, and Brendan nodded slowly. His shoulders slumped like a teenager avoiding argument. Something shifted inside me. All the small moments of recent months came back, like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. The time Kayla insisted on handling the utility bills, the way Brendan dodged conversations about the house, the strange mail addressed to me but bearing his name, the subtle hesitations in his voice. I had missed the signs, or perhaps chosen not to see them. I stayed until the curtain shifted slightly, as if brushed by the wind. My legs felt heavy, not from fatigue, but from a weight I couldn't yet name. No confrontation, no pounding on the glass, no shouting through the door, just the quiet understanding that something deliberate had taken place behind my back. It wasn't impulsive. It was planned, calculated, and I had been the last to know. I walked farther than needed, ending up at the edge of the lake near the library. The water was still. I sat on the stone wall, letting the calm settle around me. No tears, but for the first time since reading the note, I questioned how deep the damage went and how long it had started. The next morning, I made my way toward the public library, not for books, but for quiet and the plug-in outlets. My phone had died overnight, and I hadn't brought a charger. Thinking I'd be home by now, I found a corner near the window, plugged it in, and watched it spring back to life. Only one notification blinked, a missed call from Brendan around 11:40 p.m. the night before. No voicemail, no text. I stared at it for a moment. He hadn't followed up. I closed the screen and slipped the phone into my pocket. A familiar voice broke the silence, calling my name softly, then clearly. I turned to see Martina Wilkes. We hadn't crossed paths in nearly 6 years. She had been a colleague during my time in legal insurance review. Smart, sharp, the kind who scrutinized fine print with a magnifying glass and never missed a deadline. She wore confidence like armor. We hugged briefly. She asked what brought me in. I gave a vague answer, just passing time. She nodded, sensing I wasn't ready to divulge. She offered coffee from the machine down the hall. We sat by the side window. After small talk about aging knees and politics, she leaned in. She said she had run into Kayla a week ago at a local property mixer. Kayla had been all smiles, talking about the house, possibly listing it soon. A new development was opening, and she and Brendan were looking into it. Martina assumed I had already downsized and moved. I stayed silent. Martina read my expression like an open document. She straightened and said, "Something doesn't feel right." I nodded slowly, letting the quiet confirm it. She asked if I had access to the house title. I said, I used to. She urged me to double-check ownership details. She mentioned a case she once handled where a daughter-in-law quietly moved her mother-in-law into assisted living and flipped the house in under 6 weeks. I felt the color drain from my face, not from fear, but recognition. I had ignored too many clues. Kayla taking over the water bill, Brendan forgetting the insurance notice, the missing checkbook last spring. They weren't accidents. Martina offered to help. She still consulted part-time for women navigating tricky family transitions. She had seen too many mothers edged out of their own homes by paperwork and polite deception. She handed me her card, though I already had her number buried in an old notebook. We sat quietly. She didn't push. That's what old friends do. They offer space without question. Later that day, I walked to the post office and rented a small box. My name, my address, even if it was just a metal drawer in a federal building, a place to redirect anything Kale or Brendan might still try to claim. That evening, As the sun stretched across the sidewalk outside the shelter I'd checked into, I felt something different from sadness, a quiet clarity. The storm wasn't over, but I was finally facing it. The key still worked. I hadn't stepped foot in my old studio in over 5 years, yet my hand remembered the turn, the slight resistance of the lock, the gentle push to open the warped door. The second-floor space above the old bookstore had been where I met clients when I did part-time insurance consulting after Richard passed. The house felt heavy with memories. I had kept the lease as a quiet retreat. No one came here except Martina and me. The air smelled of folded time dust and lemon oil, faint printer ink, and dried lavender from a sachet left in a drawer. I walked slowly, touching the edge of the bookshelf, running my fingers over the desk I once used to sort policy paperwork and pension forms for widows. In the back cabinet, beneath a stack of manila folders and a faded holiday mug, I found what I needed. The original deed, the notarized copy of the title still in my name. Brendan's name was nowhere, not even as a beneficiary. I sat at the desk and laid everything out. There was more. I found the co-ownership agreement Richard and I had drawn up when we bought the house. It clearly stated that if one of us passed, the other retained full rights. Brendan had never been added, never discussed. We wanted him to build his own life, not inherit ours. Then came the stack of bills I kept out of habit: water, electricity, trash. I flipped through the most recent ones I had brought from the house, all now addressed to Kayla, my name erased. It hadn't been gradual. It had been fast, quiet, surgical. A utility request form with a forged signature sat atop an envelope. It wasn't my handwriting. They had already started replacing me, not just in the house, but on paper, as if I had never existed. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the small fireproof safe under the desk. I placed the deed and the old agreement inside, added a copy of my ID and the last tax return listing the property under my name. I locked it. I looked around the room once more. No pictures of Brendan, just a photo of Richard and me at a fundraiser, laughing, living. I closed the door softly, not out of fear, but because something sacred had been disturbed. They thought I was out, but they had no idea what I still held legally, in memory, in resolve, in proof. The next morning, I stood quietly at the crosswalk outside Martina's office, clutching an envelope beneath my coat. Around me, the city moved with its usual people with coffee cups and earbuds, thinking about meetings and errands, unaware of what I carried. They didn't know I had been erased slowly, deliberately. Martina greeted me with that familiar no-nonsense look. Her office smelled like lavender oil and copier paper, just as I remembered. I laid the documents on her desk without a word. The house deed, the joint ownership agreement from decades ago, the forged utility requests, the tax papers, the pieces of me they had tried to cut out. Martina didn't flinch. She skimmed each page carefully, flipping back twice. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "This is no mistake. They're laying groundwork to remove you, and I think they know you won't fight back." Her words didn't sting. They simply filled a space that had been empty for a long time, a space where I once acted with certainty and calculated risk. She picked up her phone and made a call. Within minutes, she had a name: Ash Sterling, a retired estate attorney who specialized in asset protection for older women. According to Martina, Ash didn't just read contracts. She read people. 2 days later, I stood on the porch of Ash's home office. The house was small, Tidy, quiet. A white wooden swing swayed in the breeze, curtains shifting as if someone had just passed. Ash greeted me with a calm nod and led me inside. She was older, maybe 5 years my senior, with short silver hair and a presence that didn't need to fill space. I handed over everything. She read slowly, her eyes moving like careful hands. When finished, she folded her fingers and said evenly, "None of this changes the fact that you are still the sole legal owner. The utilities being moved, the mail redirect, the digital address change circumstantial, not lawful transfer. But if they attempt to leverage it for a sale or refinance, that becomes fraud." I nodded, warmth returning to my cheeks. I hadn't realized how cold I had felt. Ash walked me through the next steps. A formal cease and desist letter. Notification to the county clerk's office to flag any attempted transactions. Documentation filed with a soft restriction to delay any unauthorized title movement. It wasn't dramatic, but it was effective. We printed everything that day. I signed without shaking. Martine arranged a courier to deliver one sealed envelope to Brendan's office and another to Kayla's last known workplace. Ash also suggested filing a protective memorandum with the neighborhood council. That would alert local realtors and banks that any claim on the house not from me should be treated with caution. It wouldn't stop them entirely, but it would slow them down. That afternoon, I waited in Ash's hallway for my ride. I glanced in the mirror by her coat rack. I looked tired, but behind my eyes, something new had settled. A steadiness, a line drawn. They hadn't taken everything. They had just counted on my silence, and that mistake they would soon regret. By the end of the week, every letter had been sent. One by courier to Brendan's law firm downtown, one to Kayla's office at the wellness clinic where she managed scheduling and finance. Another copy filed at the county office, flagged and sealed. I hadn't spoken to either of them since leaving the house that morning with my suitcase. Then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. Brendan's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring once, twice, again. No voicemail, no text, just repeated calls spaced, as if he hoped to catch me off guard. By the 6th attempt, a message arrived from Kayla, short, sharp. "You didn't have to go this far." I sat with it for a long while. I didn't reply. Later that night, I sent one line. "Everything has a reason. So does this." I knew the silence would speak louder than any explanation. The next morning, I walked near my old neighborhood just after sunrise. I didn't approach the house. I only strolled along the sidewalk by the park, passing the garden, where I once took Brendan when he was little. From a distance, I could see the backyard. The blinds were drawn. By noon, Martina called. Brendan had emailed her firm's generic inbox, questioning the validity of the documents. Ash responded professionally and briefly. She confirmed the cease and desist was active, included her license number, directed him to property records for independent verification. No threats, no accusations, just a wall of clarity. That evening, Brendan came to my studio. He knocked, waiting patiently. I opened the door just enough to see his face. His eyes were tired, more confused than angry. He asked if we could talk. I stepped aside, not to welcome him, but to show I wasn't afraid. He stood by the window, looking down at the stack of papers on my table. He said he hadn't known everything. Kayla had taken the lead, thinking I needed rest. It wasn't meant to escalate this far. I said nothing. Finally, I asked one thing, not as a mother, but as a woman speaking to a grown man who should have known better. Why didn't you stop her? He looked at the floor. His answer came slowly. Because I didn't want the conflict. Because it felt easier to step back. Because I didn't think you'd push back. It wasn't cruelty. It was cowardice. He hadn't chosen her over me. He had chosen silence over discomfort. And in that moment, I recognized a new kind of betrayal. He asked if there was anything he could do now. I told him the letters were sent. The alerts had been filed. The title was secure. The house was no longer at risk. I didn't share every detail, just enough to make him understand. When he left, I closed the door softly behind him, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with a quiet certainty. The kind that comes when the illusion of family falls away and you find steadiness elsewhere, in yourself. The following days passed without a word from Brendan or Kayla. I didn't expect apologies, nor understanding, but I anticipated movement, some kind of response. And when it came, it was calculated. Saturday morning, a courier showed up, a white envelope with my name typed neatly, no return address. Inside was a letter from a real estate office addressed not to me but to Brendan and Kayla, a carbon copy of an internal inquiry requesting documents for a pre-sale evaluation of my house. My house? I didn't panic. I just called Martina. An hour later, she arrived at my studio. She scanned the letter and muttered a curse. We both knew what it meant. They were testing the system, seeing if they could slip past the alerts Ash had put in place. A quiet, shadowy maneuver. Martina was ready. She called Ash and forwarded the documents. Within hours, Ash filed a second-level restriction with the property office and notified the realtor directly. Any further inquiry about the home would require my notarized authorization. The walls around my house were now fortified. The audacity still stunned me. Not just the attempt to erase me from the deed, but the implication that my years of care and love for that home could be dismissed with a forged signature. That night, I slept lightly. Sunday afternoon, Brendan came again. He didn't knock, just waited outside until I opened the door. His eyes held something tighter this time, not desperation, more strategy. He asked if we could talk. I nodded but didn't invite him in. He stayed on the porch. He said Kayla had made a mistake. Things moved too fast. She was scared I would retaliate, make everything public. Words like misunderstanding, oversight, communication gap flow from him. I stayed quiet, letting the silence speak. Then I looked him in the eye and said what I'd been holding in all along. You knew, you always knew, and you let it happen because it benefited you. He didn't argue. He said he never wanted it to come this far, that he was tired, that standing up to Kayla was impossible. That was the moment something inside me shifted permanently. I saw clearly he hadn't been manipulated, trapped, or forced. He had made a choice, not out of hate, but out of comfort. Comfort over courage. I thanked him for coming. Then I closed the door, not angrily, not bitterly, but with finality. I had seen the truth unmasked, and I could no longer pretend otherwise. The morning fog hung low as I walked toward Martina's office, a bag of scones in hand, quiet resolve in my chest. Something told me the unraveling wasn't finished, and I was right. Martina stood by her window when I arrived. She didn't turn to greet me. She held up a thick file and said calmly, "I think we've got a problem." She spread the papers across her desk. The first was a digital printout of a loan pre-approval application from a regional bank. Brendan's name and mine appeared. Next to mine was a signature that looked familiar but wasn't mine. A sloppy copy of my name, dragged and dropped into boxes I never authorized. Martina had pulled the documents from a private records monitor she used for certain clients. Something about Brendan's activity triggered a soft red flag. He created an online account under a joint ownership profile, submitted fabricated authorization forms, and tried to secure a line of credit against the house. The documents included a scan ID, my old driver's license, and a utility bill with my name barely visible. Just enough to look real at a glance, but not enough to survive scrutiny. Martina's face tightened. "This isn't just manipulation," she said. "It's criminal." I sat down, stomach heavy with weary clarity. They weren't just removing me from their lives. They were trying to erase my legal existence. We called Ash. She arrived that afternoon, leather case under her arm, eyes sharp behind glasses. She reviewed the paperwork carefully, took her time, then said evenly, "He's created a fictitious authorization trail. Forgery, wire fraud submitted online." Ash moved quickly, drafted a formal complaint to the bank's fraud investigation unit, filed a notice with the local district attorney's office under quiet flag protocol, then pulled another form for the neighborhood council and property registrar, freezing any transactions or claims, using my name or address without my in-person verification. A silent lockdown. Brendan wouldn't know until he tried to move again. When he did, he would hit a firm wall built from paper and precision. Martina sat beside me while Ash worked, her voice soft. Some sons take after their mothers. Others learn from different examples. I didn't respond. I stared out the window at sparrows wrestling over crumbs on the sidewalk. I thought of Brendan as a little boy running along that same sidewalk with grass-stained jeans and scraped elbows. Then I thought of the man trying to write my name into something he hadn't earned. By the end of the day, everything was filed. Ash-insured copies were stored in multiple systems, flagged, and backed by notarized affidavit. I left with a folder under my arm, something stronger than anger filling my lungs. Clarity. They had erased me on paper. Now I had written myself back in. The invitation came in a text from Brendan. Short, polite, almost too polite. "We're having a family discussion Saturday. Hope you can come. It's time to clear the air." I stared at it long. Family discussion sat on the screen as if it still meant something. As if I still belonged. I didn't reply immediately. I forwarded it to Ash. She replied in minutes. "Let me come with you just in case." Saturday afternoon arrived with gray skies and a wind that made you hug your coat. Ash picked me up in her sensible navy sedan, briefcase, and calm presence in tow, a notarized copy of the cease and desist letter bound and ready. The house looked just as I remembered. White shutters, red door, planter box with struggling petunias. But everything felt different, like stepping into a replica of your life built by someone else's hands. Inside the living room, everything was staged. Fluffed cushions, burning candles, a cheese board on the table. Kayla stood by the fireplace in a tailored sweater, her smile too wide. Brendan greeted us with a handshake, eyes darting between me and Ash. Nervous, prepared. We sat. No one touched the food. Kayla began speaking smoothly, like a pitch. "We know there's been tension, and we wanted an open, respectful dialogue. This is still your home too," she said, gesturing. Ash set down the letter, without raising her voice. "Actually, this home belongs solely to my client, Marjorie Lindo. She remains the legal owner on all official documentation. Any representations otherwise have been formally challenged and recorded. This is not a discussion. It's a confirmation. Silence fell. Brendan paled. Kayla blinked, stalled midair. Ash continued. We are aware of forged documents submitted to multiple institutions. Those filings have been reported and flagged. Further action is pending, but my client reserves the right to press charges. Kayla's voice dropped. This isn't how we wanted to do things. I looked at her, really looked, and I saw it. The cracks, the loss of control, the unraveling of her story. Brendan tried to speak but stopped, hands clenched. I stood, no yelling, no speeches. You tried to write me out of my own life. You thought I wouldn't notice. Then I turned to leave. Ash followed. At the door, she paused. One final line. If you attempt to interfere again, legal proceedings will follow immediately. Outside, the wind was colder, but fresh, cleansing. We didn't speak on the drive back. Silence had shifted something. They tried to bury me in paperwork. I had shown them I was still standing. The next morning, I packed a small overnight bag and walked into the old house one last time. I had the keys. I still held the deed. Ownership and belonging were never quite the same. Kayla washed dishes with unnecessary force. Brendan sat at the table, hands folded, waiting. They didn't speak. I stood at the threshold, letting silence draw its own boundary. Then I said it. I'm selling the house. Kayla froze. Brendan looked up, lips parted, silent. I continued. Not for revenge, not for punishment. Just because it was mine, and I no longer wanted my name on walls that had forgotten me. I placed a folder on the table. Inside, the listing agreement already signed. Ash had handled everything discreetly with her usual precision. Brendan's voice cracked. Where will you live? I looked at him, not unkindly, without softness. That's not your concern anymore. He blinked, looked down. Kayla avoided my eyes, shoulders trembling. I offered no comfort. Comfort had been spent. All that remained was clarity. At the door, I paused. The only thing that mattered. The sale proceeds would not go to them. Kayla's posture stiffened. Brendan exhaled slowly. I continued. I transferred the full amount into a foundation for women over 60 who've been manipulated, discarded, or silenced by family. It would help them find legal support, housing, and dignity. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. Martina would be executive director. Ash would oversee compliance. This house built a family. But families fall apart when love becomes conditional, so I let it go. No threats, no arguments. Just a simple fact. You made space by pushing me out. Now I'll make space for someone else who needs it. I didn't wait for a reply. I stepped outside, closed the door gently, walked down the path as if it had never been mine. The sun had risen while I was inside. I hadn't noticed until then. The sidewalk glittered with early frost. My breath fogged in the air, but I felt warm. Warm in a way I hadn't in years. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I opened my phone and pulled up the address of my new apartment. Small, quiet mine. Then I tapped send on the press release Ash drafted. The foundation would go public that week. A quiet announcement in the back.